Well, Jimmy has been arguing that the Reshat structure is Atlantis.
Exactly, yeah.
I don't agree with that. Now,
right. I remember you were here last time. You said it's Azores.
I think that the most if it existed, I think the most likely place that's the most consistent in the details of Plato's two dialogues is the Azores as a remnant. Mm-hmm. Those islands are the tops of mountains whose bottoms are part of a plateau that about which there is a lot of evidence that it has subsided by a substantial amount since the last ice age. Mm-hmm. And I've got like 9-hour lecture that I do on that. It's a pretty solid case.
I watched it. It's phenomenal. I watched it after our last podcast.
Oh, excellent. Okay.
Wasn't there a recent voyage that went out to the Azores to look at this?
I don't know.
We were talking about this. I thought
James Cameron I thought he was supposed to look at. I haven't heard anything about that since it happened. I mean, but I wasn't involved in it. But a lot of the science on this...
A seamount dive or something?
Could have been. Yeah, I don't know.
It's unfortunate that a lot of the actual science looking into the mid-Atlantic ridge submergence sort of ceased, in the 70s and 80s?
Yeah.
Most of the real science, once Atlantis became a dirty word,
right?
They kind of stopped looking at it, but I think it...
Oh, yeah, for example, one of the seamounts was named the Atlantis seamount. In the literature and everything, and I've got the old from the 50s, 60s, 70s, and then we get closer to now, the same seamount has been renamed the Atlantic seamount.
Really?
Yeah.
That's bizarre.
Well, I mean, to try to, don't want to have that connection.
To try to get rid of that
the Atlantis thing.
That woo-woo connection to Atlantis.
Right. But what I try to show in my dissertation on it is that it isn't woo-woo.
Right.
What's woo-woo about it? I mean, if you start talking about, whatever, crystal spaceships or whatever, yeah. But if you stick to whatever Plato actually says, which is what I do, I pretty much break Plato's two dialogues down and go, what did he actually say? Now, what is geology, geography, oceanography, and so forth, botany and genetics, what does all that say now in the context of what Plato said? And that's where I come up with, that to me, Azores fits the bill. But I'm not saying the Azores was Atlantis. What I'm saying is that if Atlantis was real, of all the places that have been named as potential sites for Atlantis, I think the Azores is the most consistent with Plato.
And where did Plato, he got his information from Socrates?
Solon.
Okay.
Well, actually, from descendants of Solon. In the Socratic form, it was Critias, who was like a great-grandson of Dropidas, who I think, if I'm recalling the succession, he got the original story from Solon, who got it from the Egyptian priests, who gave him the date, which was 9,000 years. In their sacred registers, is Sauntius was the name of the priest.
And that would have been when compared to now?
Well, Solon's trip to Egypt occurred about 600 BC. So if you had 9,000 years to 600 BC, which would have been 2,600 years ago, what's 9,000 plus 2,600? 11,600, which is precisely the end of the Younger Dryas, which precisely coincides with what's called meltwater pulse 1b, where there was a massive melting of the great ice sheets, pouring water into the oceans, causing the oceans to rapidly rise. Coincidence? Maybe. But what if it's not coincidence? All the pieces fit.
This is the stuff that I know you cover in your lecture series on it. But once the glaciers melt, you have isostatic rebound of the Earth's crust, which is the lifting up, like the all that weight of ice on the top of the globe here is going to come off it. So I think I love the beach ball analogy.
Yeah.
It goes up the mid-Atlantic ridge, which is where the Azores is located, is essentially think of it as like a hinge joint in the crustal plate on the planet. So imagine,
right.
So imagine if the land over here is going up, and what's it going to do? It's going to pull that apart. So you're going to have submergence of the landmass at that mid-Atlantic ridge at the same time. Yeah, it's going to go down.
It's isostatic compensation.
Yeah,
because the Earth is constantly trying to make equilibrium. So if one place goes up, someplace else has to go down, and vice versa. That's the geoid. It's trying to constantly adjust itself to fit the mathematical geoid, which is the perfect distribution of mass given the mass of the Earth, its orbital speed, its rotational velocity, rather, which is what causes that bulge around the equator. So during the Ice Age, you had this enormous buildup of ice on the planetary surface, on the land. All of that weight, which is billions of trillions of tons, is taken out of the oceans. So like Brent said, the beach ball analogy, if you take a beach ball and you press it this way, it bulges this way, right? If you, Danny, get up and go over and sit down on that cushion, what happens? Isostatic depression. When you get your ass up off that cushion, you'll have isostatic uplift or isostatic compensation. It'll come back up.
Right.
Right? I told this to Joe Rogan when I was explaining to him, and I said, Joe, you probably didn't realize that right at this moment, your ass is causing isostatic depression of the cushion on your chair. He probably doesn't remember that. But I did say that to him.